Welcome to this pre-lecture recording about interviewing for the module 329. In this session, we're going to be focusing on a particular kind of interviewing method known as qualitative interviewing, also known as the semi-structured interview. Now, the aims of this session are as follows. So hopefully by the end of the input session, you'll be more aware of the philosophical underpinnings of qualitative interviews. So the nature of the knowledge generated by qualitative interviews. You'll hopefully also appreciate some of the affordances as well as criticisms of interviews as a research method generally and as a qualitative research method. So what can interviews bring? What can they generate in terms of knowledge, and perhaps how is this knowledge limited or restricted? And finally, on a more practical side, you'll hopefully have an awareness of what constitutes more effective and less effective interview questions and practice. So at the beginning, of course, we need to ask ourselves, what are interviews as a qualitative research method in the social sciences? What do they involve? What are their key features? Now, I'll show you a definition here provided in Cohen et al., which is a research handbook, and they define the qualitative interview. I put it here in brackets because it wasn't actually in the original quotation. The qualitative interview is a flexible tool for data collection, enabling multi-sensory channels to be used, verbal, non-verbal, spoken, and heard. The order of the interview may be controlled while still giving space for spontaneity. And the interviewer can press not only for complete answers, but also for responses about complex and deep issues. So, in short, the interview is a powerful implement for researchers. So I've highlighted some of the keywords here for this definition of a qualitative or semi-structured interview. The first one being flexible. We're not looking to implement a rigid series of questions in a particular specific order every time. We're looking to be flexible. So we're keen to listen to our research participants, to understand what they're saying, and perhaps to evolve the interview, to change the nature of the interview based on what they're saying, probe for more information. It's also a multi-sensory interaction. So whilst we often care more about the verbal side of it, what our participants actually say, we can't ignore the fact that it's also, particularly if if we can see our participants, there are non-verbal elements to it as well. And I think the semi-structured interview is a balance between the control that's provided through an interview guide with certain questions, but also provides the spontaneity. So it provides for the researcher to explore things that they might hear that interest them in the interview, or probe for more deeper, detailed information. And this might be for the purposes of completeness, trying to get as complete an account as possible, or also to account for the complexity that might be apparent in the situation. And of course, I've underlined this final word here, powerful, because it's a method that has great potential, not necessarily easy to undertake as a research method, but one that's widely used, one that has great potential to understand better the nature of how people perceive their lived experiences, and also what or why people behave in the ways they do. So Jennifer Mason identifies three integral components to the qualitative interview, and these are as follows. So the first one is that all qualitative interviews are an interactional exchange. So they are back and forth between the interviewer and the interviewee, comprising dialogue between the two or more parties. So it could just simply be an individual interview, in which case there'd be a participant and the researcher, or it could be something with a greater number of people, possibly interactions between participants, which is often referred to as a focus group interview. Interviews commonly occur face-to-face, for example, people sitting in the same room, asking and answering questions, or could be much more prevalent in recent years, computer-mediated. What that means is online interviewing, perhaps through some applications such as Zoom or Teams. Mason goes on to say that all qualitative interviews are thematically, topically based. They may be biographical or narrative. And this means that the researcher has certain topics or themes or issues that they wish to cover, but this is done so in a fluid and flexible way. So there may be some particular issue or theme which underscores the interview. There usually is, related to the, well, central to the research problem or the research issue, reflected in the research questions. And this could be, for example, students' perceptions of the meaning of feedback, and could be their understandings related to feedback, what they understand or don't understand about feedback, or how they act on it. And that could be the particular theme or topic of the interview that's covered. And obviously there'll be subtopics that are likely to come up in the interview, possibly tangents that may or may not also be relevant. Finally, here in this longer point here, this really is the I guess the philosophical underpinnings of the qualitative interview, and that is that such interviews, knowledge is regarded as situated and contextual. And what that means is the interview is a contextualized form of data collection method as opposed to a decontextualized one. So the features of the context of the interview, where and when it happened, are important. The participants in the process of interviewing, the nature of the participants, their backgrounds are important, and how they act within the interview. And this means the researcher needs to bring to the focus such features so that this situated knowledge can be produced. And a good example of this is the reflexivity that researchers often need to show when engaging with participants in an interview, and that involves them thinking about how they affected the interview through their line of questioning or their personality, how they were with the participants, their choices that they made in the interview, perhaps the selection of settings, because this all has an implication for the direction of the interview. And it's important as well to underscore that the meanings that come out of an interview, the knowledge that's generated by an interview, is created through an interaction. So it's not just the one-way transmission of information. It's not the imparting of information from interviewee to interviewer, but it's what we call this co-construction of knowledge, where the participant and researcher are working cooperatively to create knowledge through this interactional exchange.